Writ of habeas corpus. Anybody hear of that? What that means basically is, the technical term is, you bring the body up here. This is what you do in order to, if you're incarcerated, you ask for writ of habeas corpus to determine whether or not you're legitimately incarcerated. According to the Constitution, you couldn't suspend that unless we were basically invaded. Well, we weren't invaded, but they rounded up all these people, put them in concentration camps or internment camps. Number 9.
The right of the people to be secure in the persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Fourth Amendment, U.S. Constitution.
Thank you. Fourth Amendment, United States Constitution. And that is one of the most heavily litigated amendments of the Constitution to this day. It's still going through interpretation. But it says, wait a minute, you can't be subject to unreasonable searches and seizures. You know, most of the people, 100,000, probably a little over 100,000 Japanese were put in camps. Korematsu, the opinion, said, yeah, we realize that most of these people were loyal to the United States. And we realize most of them did no crime of treason, did not pose a threat. But we're not only going to take them and put them in a concentration camp, we're going to take their property and sell it. Number 10. It's one of the most invoked clauses of the Constitution as well. You got to have due process. Due process is basically notice and hearing, opportunity to defend yourself. Were the Japanese given that? Korematsu, World War II? No. Not only were they interned, they had their property taken away without being able to go ask why, to show that they were very loyal to the United States. Due process clause. Who's got number 11?
No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. 14th Amendment, Section 1 of the United States Constitution.
Equal protection clause. We can't discriminate against somebody just because of their race, their color, their religion. We gotta treat everybody equally. You know, funny thing. You remember World War II, don't you? Not that you were there, but you read about it, right? Who were supposedly the bad guys, or as President Bush would say, the evildoers in World War II, excuse me. No, Japanese. Who else? Come on, don't look at me. Young man right there, he's saving you. Okay, you owe him. Germans. Who else? Who else?
Stalin and Mussolini.
Well, you got half right. Pick one.
Not Stalin, my bad. Mussolini or Mussolini.
That's right. Italians. Well, have you ever journeyed through the United States? How many of you here have a last name that ends in a vowel? Okay. Now you're Hispanic, probably won't apply to you. Are you Italian? Who's Italian? Okay, Italians. You got a lot of family around here, don't you? No? It kills my example. There's a lot of Italians around here, you know? And there's a lot of Germans. You go down to Hart, Texas, Fredericksburg, you see a bunch of Germans there. Were they put in an internment camp? No. Just the Japanese. Now, they had a curfew applied to them, but it's just the Japanese. Equal protection. Well, these Japanese are citizens too. You're not putting every other citizen of a certain background in an internment camp? Equal protection. Now, We're going to talk about now why the Supreme Court said it was okay to do that. Number 12. Oh my gosh, you made me work.
Exclusion of those Japanese origins were deemed necessary because of the presence of an unascertained number of disloyal members of the group, most of whom we have no doubt were loyal to this country.
They recognize a lot of people were loyal to the. You got one of them on. Thank you.
Korematsu was excluded because we were at war with the Japanese Empire, because the properly constituted military authorities feared an invasion of our west coast and felt constrained to take proper security measures, because they decided that the military urgency of the situation demanded that all citizens of Japanese ancestry be segregated from the west coast temporarily, and finally, because Congress, reposing its confidence in this time of war in our military leaders as inevitably it must, determined they should have the power to do just this. There was evidence of this loyalty on the part of some. The military authorities considered that the need for action was great and time was short.
Why did they think be good? Why did the Supreme Court say it's okay to do that? Because we need to do it. It's bad times. We gotta be careful. It's bad times. We gotta protect ourselves. That's why they said it. Doesn't matter. Fourth Amendment doesn't matter. Fifth Amendment doesn't matter. 14th Amendment doesn't matter. Circumstances call for this action, and we're going to prove it. Now, let's go back to constitutional interpretation. Living Constitution or originalist Constitution? I'm going to put the teacher on the spot now. Which one is that? Korematsu, an example of the living Constitution?
Korematsu is living because it's the time period you're in.
An example of application of the living Constitution. We look at the circumstances as they are now, and that's how we're going to read the Constitution. Okay. Let me just curiously, you think that could happen now? You think that could happen now? Absolutely. No, Korematsu is still good law. And though we're not focusing on the Japanese, has there been of late, within the last decade, a certain race or group of people who we feel threatened by? Muslims. Can it happen today? Possibly. And in fact, that's some of the dispute, is we seized Muslims in Iraq and Afghanistan, and in Cuba, and some people say you can't do that, other people say you can't do that. Various things. Those saying you can't do that, say the Constitution, writ habeas corpus. Those saying you can are saying, because it's war.
Where could that lead with the drug cartels on the Mexican border in the next 5 years?
Well, there's some talk about the American bill now of the United States sending soldiers down there in order to help, like they did in Colombia, to stop the drug trafficking. It's going to have to be up to Mexico to approve it. I don't know. And that's a whole different kind of world too, international relations too. Now, if you have questions too, please feel free to ask. I should have said that earlier. On the other side of the spectrum, a case called Dred Scott versus Stanford. Anybody hear of that case? Dred Scott, you too? What was it? Come on. In a nutshell. How about you? Say that again real fast. I know you guys got to go back to class.
It was a slave that was living in the slave states, went up with his master to a free state, and thought that just because he was in a free state that he was free. But the Dred Scott case said that he was property and that if he was in the slave state, then he is in fact a slave, but he's not free.
That's right. Good synopsis, thank you. Very good. Basically, Dred Scott wanted his freedom. I went to a state where slavery was not allowed. I want my freedom. The Supreme Court said, sorry, it doesn't work that way. Here's why. Number 14. Allow Mr. Dred Scott to sue in federal court. That was actually the issue, is whether or not he can sue in federal court under the concept of diversity jurisdiction, which requires him to be a citizen of the state. And we're not going to do that because he ain't a citizen. When the Constitution was enacted, blacks were not citizens when the Constitution was enacted. Living Constitution, originalist version, or originalist interpretation. What do you think? Yeah, you can't pull your shirt up to cover your face. I already saw you. I gave you a hint before. We already did Living Constitution, so what does that leave us? You go back to what was intended and what circumstances existed at the time the Constitution was created. And because of that, we look back to 1787, and blacks were not citizens, so they don't get to sue in federal court. Those are the extremes. Those are two examples of how both interpretations can lead to real questionable results. And why I point that out is not so much, and they're interpreting, by the way, both courts were interpreting the same Constitution. Well, the 14th Amendment wasn't enacted during Dred Scott. It came as a result of Dred Scott's Civil War. But they're interpreting the Constitution. And the reason why I point this out is, in effect, what's the Constitution? We said it's kind of an agreement. Somebody said it's kind of an agreement. It's an outline. It's a guideline. What's the Constitution made of? What's the Constitution made of? What's a book made of?
Paper?
Okay, what's on the paper?
Well, the Constitution, it's supposed to be the
Well, what's on this paper?
ink.
Ink. What's that ink form?
What's that?
What's the ink form?
It's words.
There you go. Exactly right. The Constitution is just words. Constitution is just words. And people can take those words and say, oh man, I can interpret them the way I want. The judiciary says I can interpret them the way I want. So what's important is not what the Constitution says, even though that's important. Let me take that back. It is important. What's the more important is who's interpreting it. Who's interpreting that Constitution? Because it is only going to be as good or as bad, as full or as empty as the people